right, welcome to Hard Math with Kevin. Drew Chambers, VP of Marketing for Corus. I'm here with the Chief Analytics Officer, Kevin Mabe of Corus. In this episode, Kevin, you're going to be walking us through setting up a segmentation analysis and why it's important, correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And so we covered factor analysis and cluster analysis in previous videos, and so some of that we will be using here. So I'm going to gloss over some of those sections, but what I really want to talk about is, what a segmentation is, what its purpose is, and also talk about what it's not. So I guess I'd open this out by saying, Drew, in your experience in the past, what have you known about segmentations?
Well, I would say that most of what I have dealt with segmentation has been something that somebody has given to me in my capacity as leader of a marketing team to say that these are the various groups of your target customer and how you should probably think about them differently and message to them differently. But again, that's coming from the perspective of being handed something as opposed to actually doing the work and fully understanding what's going into it.
Yeah, but I mean that's a great segue. So it is not possible, or it's often not possible, or desirable, or cheap to reach every individual customer with completely personalized material. And so as a result, you want to understand a customer group, for instance, in a certain number of groups, so that you can whittle down the number of messages that you test, but still try to reach people in the best ways possible. And so that really opens up to the number one rule about segmentations, which requires its own slide, is that segmentation must have a purpose. So sometimes what you'll see are segmentations that basically kitchen sink segmentations, where you throw all the variables in a soup and see what comes out of it. The problem with that is while it can help you with understanding the landscape and context, it's not often very actionable. Instead, what we're going to be doing is going through a very actionable example in the next video, where we're going to revisit the data set, the transportation data set, where we surveyed about 800 customers, even though we have a database of tens of thousands. Well, I can't understand all those tens of thousands because I can't reach all of them with surveys, but I can use segmentation to understand that by taking some survey data. So what we're going to do is understand, the attitudes of these customers through a survey to understand things that I can't necessarily know about them up front because I have certain information about them in my database, but I may not know how they feel about fares or their attitudes on the breadth of system, etc. But what I want to talk about first is the types of variables in a segmentation. There are generally three buckets, and they do overlap, and I created this nifty, colorful Venn diagram down here. So,
always creative.
Always creative. This is this is what they pay me for. So the first variables is what are we actually putting in the segmentation? Okay, so those are the variables that we actually create the analysis around. Now, this is actually not necessarily an easy discussion to have, and so therefore, it's important for us to understand what are we really trying to group here. And in this case, we're going to show the example in the data. We're actually trying to group the customers' feelings and satisfaction on the 5 ratings that we have in the transportation survey. Then there's a second group of variables called the profiling. Now, these are basically trying to understand, once these segments are created, how do we describe them? How do we bring them to life? How do we, give to internal clients, internal customers, an understanding, or how was Drew given the segments that Drew received? How were they described to him? And that could be gender, that could be income, that can be other variables in the survey, a lot of different kinds of things.
I've seen these described in so many interesting ways.
Yep.
It's like, relaxation seekers.
Yep.
Or, the, summertime fun hanger-outers. It's just like, it's
Yep.
unbelievable the amount of like funny profiles that you can develop for these.
Exactly, and that's typically called building a persona around these segments, because I mean this is a mathematical exercise, but it's half art as well. And so understanding who these segments are through profiling helps you to label them, to talk about them, to see how they differ from other segments. And so profiling variables are basically all the material that you can use in order to profile or understand the segment. Now there's a third group of variables called predictor variables. Now in this instance this example that we're going through is we're actually going to use the information of the segmentation to see if I can understand the 800 customers in their survey, so I can predict the segment membership of the other 10,000+ customers in my database. Now, these predictor variables may or may not be all or some of the profiling variables, because not all profiling variables are statistically significant in predicting them. But this is where the real power comes into segmentation. So profiling is important. It helps us give us context and a story around who these segments are. But if I'm actually able to build a statistically predictive model of these segments, then I can take known variables that I have and project and predict a potential segment. So if we go to our data set here, this...
And just to jump in there,
yes,
Kevin, I think that's really important, because, and certainly coming from the marketing side, and I know that these videos are often really educational, and these are meant to be for individuals that are diving deep into the analysis and maybe want some tutorials and some information and some how-tos. But certainly from the marketing perspective, that's the real secret sauce that you just hit on, right? Which is the ability, as you've got people being added to email lists,
yep,
people that are browsing your website, that are coming into your brick and mortar store,
yep,
being able to slot them into certain profiles and personas where you can then target, hyper target that messaging to them so that they're going to convert down the road. That's really where the rubber meets the road. So that's hugely important, and I just don't want to gloss over that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely good. So the data that we have here.
As I interrupted you, sorry.
No, that's great. No, it's actually the biggest takeaway from these two videos is the use of is exactly that use, because we want to know how soon can we identify these customers from that information, and how do I target them differentially. So just to give an example, here's the data that we have, and we have the three potential groups of variables. So the segmentation variables, we're actually going to use the factor scores built from the factor analysis of these 5 ratings here. The profiling variables, we're going to use these 3 categorical variables that were in the survey, as well as in our database, as well as the original 5 rating variables. And then finally, we're going to see if we can build a predictive model of the segments that we build using these 3 predictive variables. And the reason why we're not using these 5 variables in the predictive model, or at least testing them, is because we don't have that information in our database. All that we have is member level, district, and gender. So is there information here that I can actually predict segment membership going forward? So in our cluster analysis video, we talked about a 4-segment solution for the variables. This was the first factor, which essentially includes all 4 of the 5 rating variables, all but fair. This is the second factor, and so cluster D, for instance, they are very satisfied on the fair, and they're very satisfied about breadth of system, etc. The least satisfied individuals is cluster A here. But we could have just easily built a 6 cluster solution where you've got the super satisfied with everything, then you've got the middle of the road satisfied with everything but the fair, but yet still satisfied in the fair, and so forth. So the question is there's argument and creativity in selecting the number of segments, and the best guidance I can say is, how many differential actions are you really going to take? If you've got enough manpower, budget, etc., and creativity to attack 6 segments very differentially, then that would be the magic number that you would want to go with. Instead, for our example, our client really only had the wherewithal to approach the customer population in about 4 ways. And so we're going to go with a 4-factor solution here. And Drew, in your example, if you recall, how many segments were there that were given to you for those marketing purposes?
We had 3.
Okay.
3 in the last. I mean, the last time that I went through this.
Got it. Okay, cool. And typically,
the range.
Yeah, there can be a range.
Range from 2 to I think 10 was the most that I've seen.
Yeah, it can expand quite a bit, especially if you're not taking differential action but looking for just context. Then that's when you see segmentations go up to 10, 15, 20, even 30 different groups. And finally, before we go to the next video, again, when we do these kinds of segmentations, it's always good for good practice to document, how is the fit of this segmentation. So in our example, we used a data reduction technique called factor analysis, which explains 64.6% of the variance. Then we explained about 70% through the actual clustering. So the overall fit for the segmentation is about 45%, which is actually pretty high. There's no magic number here, although I do start worrying if segmentations fit the data less than 25, maybe 30%. It's just a segmentation that just doesn't fit as well for me to have good confidence that it's capturing a lot of the nuances amongst all the different groups. So I think this is a good stopping point for at least this setup, and then in the next video we're going to actually profile these. We're going to create the segments, we're going to profile these segments, and then test some variables to see if they're actually predictive.
Perfect. Well, Kevin, as always, thank you. And to the viewers, we will have links in the show notes to some of the previous videos. So if you want to dive into that clustering and factor analysis, you'll have the links there. As always, please feel free to reach out to us with any suggestions, videos that you'd like to see, comments, questions for Kevin. We're always looking for good material and topics that people are interested in. So thanks again, Kevin, and we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Drew.